Hello and welcome, dear listeners. Before we begin our story today, I want to say something important. This is not just a mystery story. It's also your chance to learn and improve your English in a fun and exciting way. The story you're about to hear is full of suspense, mystery, and twists, but it's told in simple, clear English, so anyone can understand and enjoy it. So whether you're a student, a beginner in English, or just someone who loves a good story, you're in the right place. Now, let's begin the story. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when Detective Mark Bennett arrived at the old Rosehill Grand Hotel. He had been working on a strange case. People were disappearing in the city without a trace. They had no enemies, no signs of struggle, just gone. Mark had no clue where to start, but one thing connected them all. Each missing person had stayed at the Rosehill Grand Hotel before vanishing. When Mark reached the front desk, he met Stephen Carter, the hotel manager. Stephen looked friendly, but something in his eyes felt cold, like a secret he wouldn't tell. "Room 13, Mark asked. Stephen laughed. "Oh, that's just an old joke. There is no room 13 here, detective." But Mark had already heard the rumors. Guests said they had stayed in room 13. Some even said they felt something strange there, like someone watching them. But when they tried to find it again, it was gone. Mark asked to see the blueprints of the hotel. And just like Stephen said, room 13 was not on the map. It didn't exist. Or did it? As the rain hit the windows, Mark knew one thing for sure. If he wanted answers, he would have to find the room that wasn't supposed to exist. And what he found was something no one could believe. Detective Mark Bennett returned home after visiting the Rosehill Grand Hotel. But he could not sleep that night. He kept thinking about room 13. Why did some guests say they stayed in it when it did not appear on the blueprint? Why did the hotel manager act so strange when Mark asked about it? The next morning, Mark went back to the hotel. This time, he came alone without telling anyone. He wanted to look around carefully. He believed something was wrong, and he wanted to see it with his own eyes. The hotel was quiet. It was an old building. The walls were tall and the lights were a little dim. The floors made small sounds when he walked. Mark looked at the room numbers. 10, 11, 12, then 14. Room 13 was missing. But between room 12 and room 14, Mark saw something strange. The wall looked newer than the others. The wallpaper was slightly different. There was also a small space between the two doors, wider than normal. He gently knocked on the wall. It gave a different sound. Hollow, like something was behind it. He went downstairs and asked the receptionist, a young man named Chris. Chris was nervous when Mark asked questions. He looked around before speaking. "Sir," Chris whispered, "room 13. It's not a joke. People really stay there, but they don't know it. It doesn't have a number. We are told to call it room 12B, but it's not on paper. It's like the room doesn't exist." Mark asked, "Who told you that?" Chris looked scared. "The manager, Mr. Carter. He said not to speak about it. He said it's an old part of the hotel, and guests might get confused. But I once brought towels to that room. felt cold, too quiet, and there was a strange smell. Not strong, but like something old. Dead, maybe. I never went back. Mark took note of this. He thanked Chris and promised not to tell anyone he had spoken. Then Mark asked to see the guest logbook. It was a big leather book where guests signed their names when they checked in. Mark slowly turned the pages, looking at the names of people who had disappeared. And one by one he found them. All had signed in. All stayed in room 12B. But none had checked out. His hands began to shake when he turned to the last page. There, in clear writing, was his own name. Mark Bennett. Room 12B. Check-in date, next Thursday. But the most terrifying part? It was not written in his handwriting. He stared at the name, his own name, signed, dated, and written by someone else. He had never written that. He hadn't booked a room. He hadn't planned to stay. And yet, the hotel believed he would come back. The air felt colder. Mark closed the logbook slowly. Something dark was happening in that hotel. Something old. Something hidden. He knew one thing now. The hotel was waiting for him. And room 13 was real. Detective Mark Bennett stood alone in the hotel's reception area. The heavy logbook was still in his hands. His name, written in someone else's handwriting, stayed in his mind. It felt like the hotel had already planned his future. A future he had not agreed to. He took a deep breath and made a decision. He needed to see room 12B. Not later. Not next week. Today. Mark went back up the stairs. The hallway was quiet. Rooms 12 and 14 stood like guards on either side of the hidden door. He placed his hand on the strange wall between them. It felt colder than the other walls. Very gently he pressed against it. To his surprise, a small part of the wall moved. It wasn't a wall at all, it was a hidden door. The latch clicked softly, and the door opened into a narrow hallway. It was dark, but he had a flashlight with him. He turned it on and stepped inside. The hallway smelled of dust and something else. Something sweet and rotting. The air felt heavy. The light showed old wallpaper peeling off the walls. This part of the hotel had not been cleaned or touched for years. He walked forward slowly. At the end of the hall, he saw a wooden door with a faded number painted on it. The number was almost gone, but he could still make it out. 13. Room 13. Mark put his hand on the doorknob. It was ice cold. He turned it and stepped inside. The room was large, but dark. Heavy curtains covered the windows. The bed was made. The floor was clean. It looked like a normal hotel room. But something was wrong. He couldn't hear anything. No cars outside. No wind. No voices in the hallway. The silence was too deep. Mark stepped forward and saw a chair in the corner. A suitcase sat next to it. He opened the suitcase and found clothes. A toothbrush. A wallet. Inside the wallet was a driver's license. The name on the license was Anthony Miller, one of the men who had gone missing 2 months ago. Mark checked the room more carefully. In the closet, there were 3 other suitcases, each with personal items, each belonging to a person reported missing. They had all stayed in this room. Suddenly, he heard a sound, a soft knock. He turned around. but no one was there. Then the door to the bathroom creaked open by itself. Mark pointed his flashlight inside. The mirror was broken. Pieces of glass lay on the floor. On the wall, someone had written words in what looked like dark red paint, or maybe something else. The words said, "You are the final guest." Mark's heart beat faster. He stepped back. He wanted to leave, but something caught his eye. A strange line on the wall. A thin crack running across it. He touched it, and part of the wall moved again. Another hidden door. This one opened into a space behind the room. It was not a room. It was a long, narrow tunnel inside the walls. He stepped in, shining the light ahead. The tunnel was made of bricks and wooden beams. It smelled like death. As he walked deeper, he saw them. Bodies, some wrapped in old sheets, some standing, frozen in place, like they had been hidden in the walls for 100 years. They looked dry, like the life had been taken out of them long ago. Their faces still had fear in them. Mark counted. 1, 2, 3, 8, 12. There were at least 20 bodies in the tunnel. And that's when he understood. These were the real staff of the hotel. People who once worked here. People from the past. People who never left. Something or someone was keeping them in the walls. And now it wanted him to stay too. Mark turned and ran back through the tunnel. The room. The hallway. Back into the real part of the hotel. When he reached the lobby, the manager, Mr. Stephen Carter, was waiting for him. He smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret no one should ever learn. Mark stood still at the bottom of the stairs. Mr. Stephen Carter was standing behind the reception desk, watching him carefully. His smile was quiet, slow, and cold. Mark had just returned from room 13, where he saw hidden tunnels and dead bodies in the walls. His hands were still shaking, but he kept a calm face. He didn't want the manager to know what he had seen. "Everything all right, detective?" Mr. Carter asked softly. "Yes," Mark lied. "I was just walking around." Mr. Carter nodded. "This hotel has many interesting corners. Some places are very old. They play tricks on the mind." Mark didn't answer. He walked toward the door like he was about to leave. But inside, his thoughts were racing. How long had these people been disappearing? How long had the hotel been hiding this secret? And who was behind it? Mark stepped outside, got in his car, and drove away. But he didn't go home. He went straight to the police station. He needed to check something. He walked to the records room and searched for files on the Rosehill Grand Hotel. He found old newspapers, reports, and property records. Many pages were missing. Some had been cut or blacked out. But one small article from 1893 gave him a clue. It said, "Strange fire in Rosehill Hotel. Several workers missing." The fire was small, but after that event, 12 hotel staff had disappeared. The owner had claimed they left town without warning. But now Mark knew the truth. They never left. They were trapped behind the walls, preserved somehow. He also found that the hotel had changed names many times over the years. Every 20 or 30 years, it reopened under a new name. but the address was always the same. The Rose Hill Grand was just its latest name. It had been hiding in plain sight for over 100 years. Mark printed out what little he could find. Then he sat down in the quiet office and thought. He remembered what was written in the bathroom of room 13. You are the final guest. What did that mean? Was the hotel full? Was there a plan? He went home late that night and locked all the doors. He kept the papers with him. He barely slept. The next day, Mark got a call. It was from a woman named Lisa Monroe. She said her brother, Tyler, had disappeared after staying at the Rose Hill Grand Hotel last week. She had called the police, but they didn't take it seriously. She had found Mark's number online and begged him to help. Mark asked her to meet him at a nearby coffee shop. Lisa was in her 20s, dressed in simple clothes. Her eyes were tired, and her voice was soft. He told me he was staying in room 12B, she said. But when I called the hotel, they said there's no such room. Mark nodded. That room exists. I've seen it. Lisa looked confused. Then why do they say it doesn't? Because the room hides something terrible, Mark said. Your brother is not the only one missing. He told her everything. What he saw, what he found, and what he feared. Lisa didn't cry. She just sat there quietly. Finally, she said, "We need to go back." Mark wasn't sure. "It's dangerous." "I don't care," she said. "If there's a chance my brother is still alive, I want to know." Mark thought for a moment. He knew the hotel was not normal, but he also knew he couldn't stay away. He had to face it. That evening, just before sunset, Mark and Lisa drove back to the Rose Hill Grand Hotel. They entered through the front doors like normal guests. Mr. Carter was not at the desk. The lobby was empty. They walked quickly up the stairs. They didn't speak. Mark showed Lisa the hidden door between room 12 and 14. He pressed the spot where the wall moved. The latch clicked. The door opened again. They stepped into the dark hallway. Mark had brought 2 flashlights this time. One for him, one for her. They reached room 13. The door was closed. Mark opened it slowly. The air inside was still cold. The bed was made. The chair was in the corner. The room looked the same. Lisa ran to the bathroom. The writing on the wall was still there. She stared at it. Then she turned to Mark. "What's behind that wall?" she asked. Mark showed her the crack and pushed it open. The tunnel waited for them. They entered one step at a time. Felt like walking into the past. The air was thick. The silence was heavy. They walked deeper and deeper past the bodies. Lisa covered her mouth in horror, but she kept going. Then they reached the end of the tunnel. There was a small iron door. Mark reached out and opened it. Inside was a room, an old hidden room, and in the corner was a man. Alive, weak, but breathing. Lisa gasped. "Tyler!" The man looked up slowly. His voice was dry. "Lisa!" She ran to him and held him. Tears ran down her face. Mark stared at the room. There were chains on the floor. Old tools. Symbols carved into the stone walls. This place was not just hidden. It was built for something. Something dark. something that wasn't finished yet. Mark looked around the hidden room carefully. It was small, cold, and smelled like dust and rust. The walls were made of stone, not wood or brick like the rest of the hotel. It was as if this room didn't belong to the hotel at all. Felt older, like it was from another time. The symbols on the walls looked strange. Some were circles, some were lines crossing each other, and others looked like eyes. He didn't understand them, but they made him feel uneasy. Lisa sat beside her brother, Tyler, who was too weak to stand. His clothes were torn, and his face looked pale. He hadn't eaten in days. She gave him water from her bag. Mark checked for more tunnels or doors, but there was nothing else. Just the room, the symbols, and the silence. Tyler spoke slowly. His voice was rough. He said he remembered checking into room 12B. The receptionist had smiled at him, given him a key, and told him to enjoy his stay. That night, while he was sleeping, he heard knocking on the wall. Not from the hallway, but from inside the room. When he got up to check, the wall behind the bathroom mirror slid open by itself. He stepped through it. He didn't know why. Something pulled him toward the dark hallway. He thought he heard voices calling his name. Then the wall closed behind him, and he couldn't find his way back. He walked for a while before someone grabbed him from behind. He was locked in this room. He thought he would die there. But the strangest thing, he said, was that sometimes he heard footsteps and laughter. Not from the tunnel, but from above. As if people were living in the walls above his prison. People who never slept. Mark and Lisa helped Tyler to stand. They needed to leave quickly. They walked back through the tunnel, holding on to each other. The flashlight flickered once, but it stayed on. When they reached room 13 again, the hotel was silent. Too silent. Felt like the whole building was holding its breath. They helped Tyler out of the room and made their way down the hallway. But as they turned the corner, they saw something that made them stop. Mr. Carter was standing at the end of the hall. He was not alone. 3 other people stood behind him. 2 women and 1 man, all in black clothes. Their faces were calm, but their eyes were cold. Mark felt fear rise in his chest. These people didn't look surprised. They were waiting. Mr. Carter spoke softly. "Detective, you've gone where you shouldn't have." Lisa stepped forward. "My brother was dying in there. You were going to leave him to rot." Mr. Carter tilted his head. "He chose to open the door. We never force anyone. People are drawn to room 13 for a reason. Just like you were." Mark held Lisa's arm gently, pulling her back. He said, "Let us go. You don't want trouble." Mr. Carter smiled again. "Trouble? This place has lived through fires, floods, and wars. Do you think one detective can bring it down?" The woman behind him stepped forward. She said something in a language Mark didn't understand. Mr. Carter nodded. He looked at Mark and said, "You have seen too much now. The final guest is not a warning. It's a roll. And once the final guest enters, the circle closes." Lisa looked confused. "What circle?" Mr. Carter answered slowly. "The first staff were chosen in 1893. Their job was to protect the room. Their bodies may have died, but their purpose did not. The hotel needs a new guardian now. Every few decades it calls one. Mark suddenly remembered the guest book. His own name, written in handwriting not his own, dated next Thursday. He looked at Mr. Carter. "It's me, isn't it? The final guest." Mr. Carter's face didn't change. "You accepted the room. You entered the walls. You uncovered the truth. You cannot walk away now." Mark's mind raced. There had to be a way out. He grabbed Lisa's hand and whispered, "Run." They turned and ran down the stairs. Tyler was slow, but they held him between them. The lobby was empty. The exit door was wide open. For a second, Mark thought they might make it. But as soon as they stepped outside, the world around them changed. They were no longer standing in front of the hotel. They were inside it again. Back in the hallway. Back in front of room 13. It was like time had jumped backward. Lisa looked around, panicking. "We just left. How are we back here?" Mark looked at the door. It was open again. Tyler dropped to his knees. He whispered, "It won't let us go. Not until it chooses." Then, for the first time, the room spoke. A voice, soft and dry, echoed through the hallway. Not from a person, but from the walls themselves. "You are the final guest, Mark." And the door to room 13 slowly creaked wider. Mark stood frozen in front of the open door to room 13. His heart was beating fast. The voice that spoke his name was not human. It was old and tired, but strong. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the air around them. It was everywhere. Lisa held his arm tightly. She was shaking. Tyler stayed on the ground, his head down, as if he already knew what was coming next. Mark whispered to himself, trying to think. He had seen strange things before, but nothing like this. The hotel had tricked them. It had moved them. The outside world disappeared the moment they tried to leave. Now they were back where they started. And the door was open, inviting him in. Lisa said softly, "Don't go, please." But Mark knew he had no choice. He remembered what Mr. Carter said. The hotel chooses a new guardian every few decades. It lures people in, tests them, and if they pass the test, the room keeps them. Forever. Mark thought about the guest book. His name was already written there, dated next Thursday. That meant he was still alive now, but not for long. That also meant everything happening now had already been decided. The future was already written, and somehow room 13 knew it. He looked back at Lisa and Tyler. "Stay here. Don't follow me. No matter what happens." Lisa started to argue, but Mark stepped forward. As he crossed the doorway, the air changed, felt heavier, like walking into water. The room was dark, lit only by a dim red glow from the ceiling. The walls were lined with old mirrors, all cracked. Some of the mirrors didn't show his reflection. Others showed strange shapes moving behind him. In the center of the room was a table. On it lay an old book with a black leather cover. No title, no name, just the book. Mark walked toward it. As he touched it, the room shifted. Suddenly, he wasn't in room 13 anymore. He stood in a large hall, with stone pillars rising to a ceiling so high he couldn't see it. The floor was smooth and cold. All around him stood people, men and women dressed in old uniforms. Their faces were pale and lifeless, but their eyes followed him, silent, watching. One of them stepped forward, an old man with white hair and deep scars on his face. He wore a name tag, Benjamin Harper, head of housekeeping, 1893. He spoke slowly. You have entered the heart of the hotel. Few do, fewer return. This place is not built with bricks. It is built with memory, with loss, with souls. Mark asked, "Why me? Why not someone else?" Benjamin's eyes were calm. "Because you asked questions. You saw what others ignored. You searched for a room that doesn't exist. And now it exists for you." Mark looked around. "What is this place really?" Benjamin said, "This hotel is a house for the forgotten, for those who vanished without a trace. But they never truly left. Their bodies are hidden. Their spirits serve. The room keeps their memory alive. And someone must guard that memory." Mark began to understand. The hotel needed someone to remember, to keep the secret safe, to make sure no one destroyed the balance. The final guest was not just a victim. He was the protector. Benjamin placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. Felt cold, but not painful. "If you stay, the others can leave. The debt will be paid." Mark's mind was full of thoughts. If he stayed, Lisa and Tyler would be free. The hotel would let them go. But he would remain, forever, part of the hotel. A name in a book, a voice in the wall. He asked, "And if I refuse?" Benjamin said nothing. He just stepped aside. Behind him, a new door appeared. It showed the hotel lobby. Lisa and Tyler were there, looking around, calling his name. Benjamin said, "Every guest chooses. But remember, time here moves differently. If you go now, the world outside may not be the one you knew." Mark looked at the door, then back at the old book. He felt the weight of the decision. He could leave, but at what cost? Would Lisa and Tyler be safe? Would the hotel punish them instead? Suddenly the floor shook. The walls cracked. The mirrors shattered. A voice louder than before filled the room. "Choose." Mark closed his eyes and reached for the book. As soon as Mark touched the book, the room seemed to change. The air grew colder, and a strange buzzing filled his ears. It was as if the room was alive, reacting to his touch. The ground beneath him trembled, and the walls creaked, as if they were waking up after a long sleep. Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had made the choice, but he wasn't sure what it meant. Was it too late to turn back? Could he really protect the hotel's secret and save his friends at the same time? The book in his hands felt heavier than it should have been. He opened it slowly, his fingers trembling. The pages were old, the edges worn, but the writing was sharp and clear. There were names on every page, many of them unfamiliar, but some were not. He scanned the pages quickly, and there it was, his name written in neat handwriting. Next to it, in smaller letters, it said, "Final guardian of the room." Mark felt his stomach drop. This was the moment, the truth he had been dreading. He had already been chosen. The room, the hotel, it had all been waiting for him. But he didn't understand why. Why him? Why now? Was there no other choice? The old man, Benjamin, who had spoken to him earlier, appeared again at his side. His face was calm, but his eyes were full of sorrow. He didn't need to say anything. Mark knew the truth now. This was a place where lost souls were kept, hidden in the walls, in the mirrors, in the very foundation of the hotel. And once someone chose to protect it, they couldn't leave. Benjamin spoke softly. The room never gives you an option to leave. Once you are chosen, you become part of its story, part of its curse. Mark tried to move, to speak, but the weight of the book seemed to hold him in place. He could hear Lisa and Tyler's voices calling out from the door, but they were so far away, as if they were trapped on the other side of a thick wall of glass. He could see their faces, filled with worry, but they couldn't reach him. They didn't understand what was happening. Benjamin continued, "The room needs a protector, a final guest. You've been chosen because you saw the truth, because you dared to look behind the curtain. And now the room will keep you." Mark looked back down at the book. The names on the pages weren't just names, they were stories. Each one had a story to tell, stories of people who had entered room 13, only to never be seen again. Some were victims of tragedy, others lost in the chaos of their own lives. All of them were here, part of the hotel's past, part of its dark history. The room wasn't just a place. It was a trap, a prison for those who couldn't escape, kept their memories alive, but it also took away their freedom. They were forever trapped in its walls, becoming part of the hotel's endless cycle. Mark's mind raced. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't let this place consume him, like it had consumed so many others. But what was the alternative? If he left, would the hotel let Lisa and Tyler go? Or would they be trapped too? He turned to Benjamin. What happens to them? What happens to Lisa and Tyler if I stay? Benjamin's face softened for a moment. They will be free to leave. The hotel will not hold them. But you must stay. You are the final guest, Mark, the protector of this place. Mark's heart sank. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want to be a part of this hotel's dark past. But he also didn't want to condemn his friends to the same fate. He had to make a choice, and it had to be now. Will I ever be able to leave? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Benjamin's expression darkened. No one leaves once they've become the guardian. You will live as part of this hotel, watching over it, protecting its secret. But you will never truly be free. Mark felt a deep sadness fill him. He looked at the door again, where Lisa and Tyler were still waiting. They didn't know what was happening inside. They didn't understand the choice he was making. But he couldn't explain it to them. Not yet. He thought about everything he had learned, about the hotel, about room 13, and the curse that bound them all. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe there was no choice. Maybe he had been chosen for a reason, and this was the only way to break the cycle. To protect the hotel, to protect the lost souls trapped inside it. But it didn't make the choice any easier. Mark took a deep breath and turned back to the book. He had to accept it. There was no other way. He closed his eyes, placed his hand firmly on the page, and said the words aloud, even though he didn't fully understand their meaning. "I accept." The moment he spoke, the room seemed to come alive. The walls shook again, and the mirrors that lined the walls began to crack. The ground trembled beneath his feet as if the hotel itself was reacting to his decision. But it was too late to change his mind now. As he stood there, the room slowly began to shift. The shadows in the corners grew longer, and the air grew colder. The faces in the mirrors seemed to move, to smile, to whisper. Mark felt something inside him change, as if he was becoming part of the hotel, part of the room. He felt the weight of the responsibility fall upon his shoulders. And then, the door to room 13 slammed shut behind him. Mark was no longer a guest. He was the guardian. Mark stood still, frozen, as the door to room 13 slammed shut behind him. The room felt different now, heavier, as if it was a living thing, and he had just become a part of it. The cold air wrapped around him, and the walls seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain. The mirrors on the walls flickered for a moment, showing images of people he didn't recognize. Faces of those who had entered this room before him. Each reflection seemed to whisper a name, a story, a warning. He tried to move, but his body felt stiff. It was as if the room itself was holding him in place, keeping him from leaving, from escaping. The weight of his decision pressed on him, but there was no turning back. Mark knew that now. He had accepted his role as the guardian of the hotel. But what did that mean? What did it involve? Would he be able to live with this choice for the rest of his life? He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. The room seemed to be watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. The mirrors on the walls began to shift again, showing more images. Faces, names, memories of the lost souls trapped in this place. Their eyes seemed to follow him, filled with sorrow, with longing, with a silent plea for release. Mark felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't chosen to be a part of this place. But now that he couldn't ignore the weight of the responsibility that came with it. The book he had held earlier appeared before him again, floating in the air. Its pages were still open, but now the words on the pages seemed to be changing. They shifted before his eyes, new names appearing as though they were being written in real time. It was as if the book was alive, a record of every guest who had ever stayed in the hotel. Mark could feel his heartbeat quicken as he reached out to touch the pages. The book's pages turned on their own, stopping on a new entry. His name was still there, but now it was surrounded by others. Each name was followed by a date of arrival, a date of departure, and a mysterious final entry. The final entry was always the same. Final guest, guardian of the room. Mark's hand shook as he ran his fingers over the page. He realized that the names in the book were not just guests. They were people who had become part of the hotel, part of its dark history. And now he was one of them. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Benjamin, the old man who had told him about the hotel's curse. Mark turned around, startled to see him standing at the edge of the room. "You've accepted your role," Benjamin said, his voice low and serious. Now, you must understand what that means. Mark nodded, still trying to process everything. What do I have to do? Benjamin took a step forward, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. You will protect the hotel. You will ensure that no one else can break its curse. You will be its guardian, its protector. The hotel needs you to keep its secrets safe, to watch over the lost souls trapped here. Mark felt a cold chill run through him. But what about Lisa and Tyler? What happens to them? Benjamin's expression softened. They will be free. The hotel will not hold them. But the curse will not release you. Once you become the guardian, you cannot leave. You will remain here, a part of the hotel, for eternity. Mark's heart sank. He had hoped, deep down, that there would be a way out, that he could find a way to escape the hotel's grip. But now he understood. There was no escape. He was tied to this place, to its dark history, and to the lost souls who were forever trapped inside it. Why me? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why was I chosen? Benjamin looked at him with a knowing expression. You were chosen because you could see the truth. You could see beyond the illusions, beyond the lies. The hotel needed someone who understood its curse, someone who would not break under its pressure, someone who would protect it, even at the cost of their own freedom. Mark's mind was spinning. He had never imagined something like this. He had come to the hotel out of curiosity, a simple search for answers. But now the answers had come at a terrible cost. His life was no longer his own. He was a part of the hotel now, a part of its past, its future, and its endless cycle. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening. Mark could feel the presence of the lost souls around him, their whispers growing louder. They were watching him, waiting for him to take his place. He could no longer ignore them. Benjamin spoke again, his voice filled with finality. You will not be alone. There are others here, others who have taken the same path. You will join them, become a part of the hotel's history. But you must never forget, your duty is to protect the hotel, to keep its secrets safe. If you fail, the cycle will begin again, and the hotel will claim new souls to take your place. Mark felt a deep sense of dread. He had to protect the hotel, but at what cost? What would he lose in the process? His friends, his future, his freedom? The mirrors on the walls seemed to flicker again, showing the faces of those who had come before him. Their eyes were empty, their expressions hollow, as if they had given up hope long ago. Mark realized that this was his future now. He would become just like them, another lost soul, another name in the book. He glanced back at the door that had once seemed like an escape. But now, it was nothing more than a reminder of what he had lost. He had chosen this path, and now he had to walk it, no matter where it led. With a deep breath, Mark turned back to the book. He was no longer a guest. He was the guardian, and his journey had only just begun. Mark stood alone in the darkened room, the silence pressing against him like a heavy weight. His mind raced with questions, his heart still pounding from the revelation. He had been chosen to guard the hotel, a role that seemed to have no end, no escape. The heavy air felt suffocating, and the sense of loss was overwhelming. His thoughts were tangled, and he couldn't make sense of it all. How had he come to this? How had a simple visit to a mysterious hotel turned into a lifetime of duty, a responsibility he never asked for? The mirrors on the walls flickered once again, and Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He knew the reflections weren't just mirrors. They were windows into the past, the present, and the future of the hotel. The lost souls trapped in the walls had been watching him, observing his every move. They knew his doubts, his fears. They had been where he was now, and they understood the weight of the decision he had made. He turned away from the mirrors and walked toward the center of the room. The book, still floating in midair, hovered before him, its pages turning slowly as if the hotel itself was showing him the way. Mark reached out and touched the pages, feeling the cold, ancient paper beneath his fingertips. The names in the book were endless, a long list of people who had stayed in the hotel over the years. Some had come willingly, curious about the strange history of Room 13. Others had arrived by accident, never knowing what awaited them. As Mark read through the names, one particular entry caught his eye. It was his own name, written in bold letters, followed by the date of his arrival, the date he had come to the hotel. His eyes widened as he scanned the next line. It was the date of his departure, but it was blank. There was no end date, no way out, just a blank line that stretched into eternity. His stomach turned as he realized the truth. There was no leaving the hotel. Once you entered, you were bound to it forever. Mark closed the book, his mind spinning with the implications. What kind of life was this? What kind of existence awaited him now that he was part of the hotel's dark history? He had come here seeking answers, but now all he had was more questions, more confusion, and a terrifying sense of helplessness. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound, a low whisper that seemed to come from the walls. At first, it was barely audible, like a soft murmur. But then the whisper grew louder, until it was unmistakable. Mark turned around quickly, searching for the source of the sound. But the room was still empty. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere, surrounding him, filling the space. "Guardian," the whisper said, its voice low and hollow. "You are the chosen one. You will stay with us forever." The words echoed in his mind, filling him with a deep sense of dread. Mark's heart raced as he tried to comprehend what he was hearing. He looked around the room, but there was no one there, just the mirrors, the walls, and the darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly around him. The whispers continued, growing louder with each passing moment. Mark pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block them out, but it was impossible. The voices were in his head now, inside his mind, repeating the same words over and over again. Forever, forever, forever. Mark stumbled backward, his hands shaking. He could feel the room closing in on him, the walls pressing against him like they were alive. He tried to breathe, but the air was thick, suffocating. The weight of the voices of the hotel was too much to bear. His legs felt weak, and he sank to his knees. "Why me?" Mark shouted, his voice breaking. "Why was I chosen for this? What am I supposed to do? But the voices only laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down his spine. You are the guardian, the voices said, and you will never escape. Mark's mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be something he could do to break the curse, to escape the hotel's grasp. But every time he tried to think of a solution, the whispers grew louder, drowning out his thoughts, his hopes. He stood up, trembling, and faced the door. The door that had once seemed like an escape now felt like a prison. He wanted to leave, to run away from everything. The hotel, the curse, the whispers. But deep down, he knew there was no running. The hotel had chosen him, and he was bound to it. There was no escape. Mark looked back at the mirrors once more, his reflection staring back at him with empty eyes. The figure in the mirror wasn't the same person he had been when he first arrived. It was someone different, someone changed. The hotel had already begun its work on him, and he wasn't sure who he was anymore. The man he had been before, the man who had walked into this place seeking answers, was no longer there. What was left was the guardian, and that was all he would ever be. The mirrors flickered again, and Mark saw more faces. Faces of other guardians, trapped in the hotel's walls. They stared at him, their eyes filled with sorrow and regret. But they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their expressions said it all. They had all been chosen just like him. And now they were part of the hotel's twisted history. Mark turned away from the mirrors, unable to look at their faces any longer. He felt sick, both physically and mentally. This was his fate now. He had been marked, chosen, and there was no going back. He had no choice but to accept it. He took one last look around the room at the mirrors, the walls, the door. The room had changed. It had become a prison, a place of eternal torment. But it was also his home now, whether he liked it or not. Mark knew that he would never leave this room. He would never escape the hotel. And neither would anyone else who came through its doors. The cycle would continue, and the hotel would claim more souls, just like it had claimed his. Mark sat in the silence of the room, the weight of his realization pressing on him like a suffocating blanket. There was no escape, no hope for freedom. The whispers, the voices that had once terrified him, had now become a constant companion, their eerie presence lingering in every corner of the hotel. They were a part of him now, a reminder of the unbreakable bond he had formed with the place. As Mark looked around the room, the faces in the mirrors no longer seemed like strangers. They were familiar, their eyes tired and worn, their expressions haunted by the same fear and resignation that now gripped his heart. They were the former guardians, people like him who had once stepped into the hotel seeking answers, just as he had. But now they were lost. They were part of the hotel's dark history, trapped in time, their stories never to be told. Mark's fingers brushed against the cold, glassy surface of one of the mirrors. He could feel the presence of the souls behind it, their cold eyes staring back at him. They weren't just reflections. They were real. They had been real people once, just like him. They had been chosen like him. And now they were forever bound to the hotel just as he was. The door to the room creaked, the sound cutting through the stillness. Mark turned, his heart racing, his pulse quickening. For a moment, he wondered if someone else had entered, someone who had come to free him, to help him escape. But when he looked, the door was empty. There was no one there. Yet, despite the emptiness of the room, Mark could feel a change in the air. The room itself seemed to be shifting, changing, as if the hotel was alive, responding to him. The walls pulsed with a strange energy. The mirrors flickered once again, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Guardian," the voices said, their tone now familiar, almost comforting. "You are one of us now. You belong here with us. Forever." Mark's hands clenched into fists. The words no longer held the same terror they once had. Now they were just a cold, harsh reminder of his reality. He wasn't just a guest in this place. He was part of it. He was the next chapter in the hotel's long, dark history. For a moment, Mark considered fighting back, looking for a way out. But he knew deep down that it was pointless. The hotel had already claimed him, just as it had claimed the others before him. There was no running, no escaping. He had become a part of its twisted, endless cycle. He had been chosen, and that choice could never be undone. The realization hit him hard. It wasn't just the hotel that had trapped him. It was his own mind, his own choices that had brought him here. He had walked through those doors willingly, eager for answers, driven by curiosity. But now all he had was darkness. The hotel had fed on that curiosity, turning it into something far darker than he could have ever imagined. It had claimed him not just as a guest, but as a prisoner. And now, like the others, he would be part of the hotel forever. Mark closed his eyes, trying to block out the voices, the whispers, the faces staring at him from the mirrors. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape them. They were everywhere, inside his mind, inside his soul. The hotel had taken everything from him, and in return, it had given him only one thing: eternity. The room shifted again, the walls growing tighter, the air thicker, more oppressive. Mark could feel the presence of the others around him, their souls trapped in the same never-ending cycle. They were here with him in this place, forever. And then, in the quiet darkness, Mark understood. There was no redemption, no escape, no end. He wasn't just a guardian. He was part of the hotel's legacy. He would never leave, never see the outside world again. The hotel had taken him, and now he was its keeper. Forever. The whispers faded as Mark sank to his knees, his body heavy with the weight of his new reality. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, accepting the truth. The hotel had claimed him, just as it had claimed all those before him. And now he was bound to it for eternity. The cycle would continue, and the hotel would claim more souls. New guardians would come, and they would join the others in the mirrors, trapped in the same unbreakable fate. Mark opened his eyes one last time, his gaze locking with the faces in the mirrors. They were no longer strangers. They were his companions now, his fellow guardians. They had all been chosen just like him. And now, together, they would live in the shadows of room 13, forever part of the hotel's dark history. The cycle would never end, and neither would they. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new today. If you'd like to read the full story again or share it with others, you can download the PDF version of this audiobook for free. Just click the link in the description below and get your copy now. Keep learning and stay tuned for more stories to improve your English. Happy reading!